Hey everybody, Willie Mayette, creator of Jazz Edge. Welcome to Ask Willie Live. This is where every Wednesday you can get on at 1 o'clock Eastern. Go ahead and ask me any music-related questions that you have, and I will be happy to answer them. Hello to all of my students who are joining me on Zoom. Hello to everyone who's joining in on Facebook and YouTube. So if you got any questions, go ahead and chat them in. Or if you guys are on Zoom, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your questions as well. So, who would like to go first? We go as long as there are questions. Well, I should say we go as long as there's questions within an hour. Go ahead, Joe.
I got a question about the locrian scale. You in one of your 8 scales you must know for improvisation, you have the locrian natural 9.
Yep.
And then in your podcast 36, you talked about the locrian.
Yep.
So I'm assuming there's more than one locrian scale.
Yeah, so locrian scale is typically used over a minor 7 flat 5 chord, right? So we have C minor 7 flat 5 here. So your locrian scale, first of all, the easiest way of thinking about your locrian scale is just play a major scale up a half step. So if I play a D flat major scale starting on C, then that's my locrian scale. And you see what you have in there embedded is you already have the notes of your minor 7 flat 5 chord. You also have these other 3 notes, which ironically enough are a triad, a major triad, a half step up. So if we take a look, we have those notes, and then we also have these notes, which is a major triad, a half step up. Okay? Now that major triad, a half step up, obviously we could see that that's probably not going to sound so good. So what we do is we tweak that locrian scale and we create a locrian natural 9. So what we're doing is that second note, rather than playing it as the D flat, we play it as the D natural, and you can hear how even when you play it with that C minor 7 flat 5, it actually sounds pretty decent, doesn't it? Yeah, this note right here, the flat 6, we might take that out, but scalar-wise, it's fine, but using it as a tension for your chord, it doesn't sound all that great. You see how nice that sounds? Minor 7 flat 5, your natural 9, and your 11 in there. So that's why we tweak that scale, because right, that flat 9 there doesn't sound great, but now, it's not to say that there aren't some situations in which that flat 9 might actually sound good. And, so if you're like literally playing something modal in Locrian, then probably that flat 9 is going to be the way to go. But for most of our cases, we're going to find that Locrian natural 9 is going to be something that's going to be more advantageous to us, right? But, as always, you use your ears, right? Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, it does. I really like the natural 9 sound because in one of your other
exercises,
your 28 inspiration,
where
you had the minor 7 flat 5 going to the altered, going to a major, going to the minor. You said run the scales, and I've been doing it, and I love the sound of the Locrian natural 9 to start that out with. So good, that's all, because I just wanted to know which one was more prevalent or that I should concentrate on.
Yeah, I would definitely focus more on the Locrian natural 9 than the plain old Locrian.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Willie.
Yeah, you betcha, Joe. Who's next?
I have something.
All right, Michelle. Lovely to see you. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. But here it's cold.
Cold?
We have a July really cold, 62 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's...
It's not very warm.
That's kind of like Jamie and I went to San Francisco in July a couple years ago. We had to buy sweaters. It was like in the low 60s. It was, crazy.
Not this year.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is following the discussion of yesterday with John, who is there, and about improvising and writing improvisation, composition. And I thought the following. if we maybe it's something that can help to keep the improvisational flavor, that is to compose something based on on trying something on the piano. And when you find something that is nice, just to dot the notes, not to create really the rhythmic the rhythmic structure that would help keeping the notes we want to be there, but would create lots of liberty to improvise over it.
Yeah,
is it a good idea?
That's a lovely idea. Well, and you know, just again, you know, I don't mean to beat a dead horse with this, but there's multiple paths to the same goal, right? So, like I've said, like these are your lessons. You use them however they work best for you. Same thing, like when it comes to improvisation and composition and trying to learn all of that, there's no one right path. I love that idea. I love the idea of writing out an improv. I love the idea of just free-forming an improv. I love the idea of going through exercises. I love the idea of, like what you just said, writing out notes. So all of them are good ideas that are going to work better or not better depending on the student, right? So with your idea, one thing that I really love about that is it's a great way of capturing an idea quickly, right? So if I'm gonna, you know, again, taking my C minor 7 flat 5, let's say I'm gonna do a line. Right, so I'm gonna do that line. Right, so it's ba dee ba dee ba dee ba, right? So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Right, so if I was going to write that out, I need to figure out what the rhythm is. I need to write out the rhythm. That might take me some time, right? If you're not good at deciphering those rhythms, that might be a sticking point, which is then going to slow down that whole process of you being able to write out that lick, which then is going to slow down your practice and might slow it down to a point in which you're like, forget it. I don't have any more time. What I'm saying is this. It's very possible that you would sit down, you'd be like, oh, I like that, I want to write it down, and then you dive so much into trying to figure out the right notes and the right finger, or the right rhythm and all that, and then you get in, you're like, you load up Sibelius, and it's like, oh, Sibelius needs an update. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's very easy to get lost in the weeds there with writing stuff out, all right? So if you're not set up with like your music paper and pencil, or you know, your music software, and it's like good to go, ready to go, then that slowdown could affect your practice. So what I love about your idea is like, okay, let me just get the notes down. So D, F sharp, E flat, F, E flat, D, C. All right, so then I write those down, and I can just write them down on a piece of paper, and I don't even have to write them on staff paper. I can just write D, F sharp, E flat, F, E flat, D, C. So at least I know the order of the notes, and I know the notes that I'm going to be playing. I could even, based on, write the name of the note higher or lower, right? So if I did D, F sharp, so since that F sharp is up a little bit from the D, well, I know that it is. I'm getting a political call right now. So since that F sharp is above the D, higher on the page, I know that it's higher on the staff. So that's another way in which you can write it out so that you can kind of see what the notes are without having to dive in and put it in actual music notation form. The other thing, too, is what I really like about your idea as well is that now it's not so much like, okay, here's a specific lick, but it's more like, here are my ingredients that I can use, right? So now that I know those ingredients and I know, like, oh, I like the sound of those notes, well, then now I can, like you said, kind of play around with it. So right, so then I could kind of play around with that, and I'm not stuck with, well, this is what I wrote, so I have to keep playing what I wrote, right? So, yeah, it's a great idea, and it's a nice way of being able to quickly get an idea out on paper. Now, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's very useful as well. Let's say that you want to write that out, and you want to write it out with the proper rhythm and stuff like that. Well, first of all, like I said here, let's do this. All right, so first of all, what I could do is I could just write out like, so D, F sharp, right? I could write all of this stuff out, okay? E flat, right? So I'm just writing out the names of the notes, okay? And then what I could then do is afterwards, then put in the rhythm. And they're like, okay, it's an eighth rest, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note. Or I can also say, those eighth notes, I can just combine them like that, right? So then I could apply the rhythm to it after the fact. But by starting with this first, by starting with just the notes, at least now you get the general idea out there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really. And I think it's a good way for me, at least, to build a solo. Because until now, I was working on my foolish heart, but I was trying to create an improvisation, and I was just playing on chords. I mean, it was not building anything. It was just a small little bits interesting, but not a whole thing. So I think this tool will help me to build it.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about improvisation and building those lines, right? That's really what we're talking about, is building those lines. When we're first starting with improv and you're maybe doing chord tones, you could look at it as almost like teenager answers. You know how teenagers like to answer like, yes, no, okay, right? It's like a 1 or 2 word answer. Well, then, which is fine, it gets the point across, right? But it doesn't really tell a very big story, right? So as you start to build out your improvisation skills, then you want to start to elongate those lines so they're not just 1 or 2 beats, but maybe a measure, maybe 2 measures, maybe even 3 measures or more the line. So that compositional element is a great way of building that out, but then it's also nice that you could start to see this kind of stuff, right? So you could see, I mean, did you write it and it was just that? Or did you write it and it was just this, right? So, or are you actually getting some nice, slope and arc into your solo? So the compositional aspect of it is a real nice way of being able to bridge that gap between free-form improvisation, but then also kind of being able to dig in and analyze your improvisation at a new level.
Great. Thank you so much.
Nice job. All right, so who else?
Willie, can I say something?
Absolutely, John. Go ahead.
Yeah. Since Michelle mentioned yesterday and the fact that I wrote out an improvisation, what I found is that when I was writing it out, and I mentioned this yesterday, it was more like a simple melody because I wrote it out away from the piano and I was actually looking at my notes and trying to repeat certain motives, that is just little phrases. And what I found when I completed it, it was just simple. It wasn't like an improvisation where I can just free flow with it, but it was just kind of a simple melody. But it forced me to think about the chords that I was dealing with. And even though I called it an improvisation, it really wasn't. It was really more like a simple melody. Would you agree with that? With that analysis?
Sure, yes, I do. But we also got to kind of think, what is improvisation ultimately? Ultimately, improvisation is a melody, right? I mean, so we have, if we look at our structure of our song, right, we have the melody of the song. We have the song, right, that everybody knows. Fly me to the moon and let me play amongst us. Right, so there's your melody of the song that everybody knows. The improvisation, though, is a melody that we're creating on the spot. So the only difference is that you created that melody and you wrote it down. So it's just not being created on the spot. Now, when I say a melody, some improvisations are more melodic than others, right? So sometimes you'll have a player, especially, you take a listen to like Louis Armstrong, older Louis Armstrong. You hear that he hangs right around that melody very closely and just kind of does like little melodic embellishment kind of stuff. And that's kind of like where some of his solos landed, in that kind of melodic embellishment land. Whereas you'll have other players that will take it way out. So it's not really a melody that you're going to necessarily sing, but it is still melodic in nature. So there's really little difference between composition and improvisation, right? So same thing goes with composition. Let's say that, we could do a simple melodic composition, but we can also do a complicated melodic composition as well, right? So the difference between the improvisation and composition is really just time, meaning how much time do you spend on it. In improvisation, kind of by definition, is a on-the-spot creation. A composition starts as an on-the-spot creation, right? So if I sit down and like, okay, I'm going to compose, well, I got to start with something, right? So when I'm like, okay, I'm going to compose, all right, well, there I go. Okay, there's the start of my composition. I had to come up with something, and that was free form right then. But then as soon as I start taking this and I start writing that down, now I'm into composing land. And then once I'm in composing mode, then I could start to nitpick it and kind of tease it and twist and turn. But I say all of this because I want to caution you against thinking that melody and improvisation are two separate things, or improvisation and composition are two separate things. They're really not separate at all. At the end of the day, okay, when we really think about music, we really have harmony, melody, rhythm. Okay? That's really it, right? So harmony being your chords, your progression, stuff like that, whatever voicings you're going to use. Melody is obviously the melody. Now that might be fly me to the moon and let me play, or it might be zibit ba dee ba dee do ba da do ba do ba ba ba. It might be an improvisation melodically. And then rhythm is, well, obviously it's rhythm. And if you do all the same rhythms, like if you make a melody or an improv using only whole notes and half notes, not going to sound very interesting, right? But as you start to bring in some more interesting rhythms, well, now your melodic composition, improvisation will sound much more interesting. But at the end of the day, like that's it. It's really that triangle: melody, harmony, rhythm, okay? And then what I like to say is right in the middle there is soul, right? So a computer can do all three of those better than any of us can do, and they can do it instantaneously 24/7. They could create a melody, they could create the harmony, they could play any rhythm at any tempo, right? But inside of that soul, that's that X element, right? And you know that when you hear somebody improvising, and it's like, wow, you could feel that passion. It's not just notes, it's not just harmony, it's not just rhythm. There's some X element to it. But the reason we want to think about that trinity there, the melody, harmony, and rhythm, is that then we avoid falling into the trap of thinking that, oh, wait, there's a difference when I'm playing a melody versus improvising. No, an improvisation is still a melody, right? It's just a melody that you're creating on the spot. Oh, but now I composed it. All right, well, you're not doing it on the spot anymore. Now you wrote it down, and now once you write it down, here's the other little trick to it, or the other little caveat, I should say, is once you write it down, now you got kind of some more responsibility. Because when you play it on the spot, if you make a mistake, all right, well, I was doing it on the spot, right? I made a mistake. You write it down, and you're in composing mode now, and there's a mistake in there. All right, like that's where it's like, wow, do you really want to keep that mistake in there? Now that you're in composition mode, maybe you should fix that, right? So that's the benefit of the composition mode, is that you could take that improvisation and you can tweak it and create something that's a little bit more seasoned. So for you, John, when you created that melody that you composed, and you did it away from the piano, first of all, it's a great exercise, right? Because that's a great way of being able to really see melody and harmony and how that goes together, right? The notes and the chords, and really be able to see like, okay, what notes are going to work over this chord, and you're looking at it not from you're not being able to use your ear and say, oh, I like the sound of that, I don't like the sound of that. No, you're just using your brain and saying, you know what, that D natural on a C minor 7 flat 5 chord is going to sound nice because it's a locrian natural 9. But if I play D flat, I know it's not going to sound all that great. It's going to rub a little bit, right? So that's a great exercise. But the melody that you created, there's a couple of things that have happened. Number one is that you created the melody and you wrote it down. So in your mind, you're immediately thinking, this ain't improv. So as soon as you start saying that to yourself, this ain't improv, well, it's not going to be improv, right? It's just like anything else. Like if you say, you know what, that cake I baked, yeah, it's going to be terrible. Well, of course it's going to be terrible if you keep telling yourself that, right? So the first part is when you compose it and you think that it's a composition, well, right there it's going to feel more melodic to you than improvisation because you're not doing it on the spot. Number two, the other issue was you got to play it a lot now, right? In order to make it feel like it's just off the cuff. You know, a good analogy for that is imagine going to a theater performance and somebody is reading out of the book, you know, the script, to be or not to be, right? You know, they're not going to be able to add the same emotion and dynamic range as if they had it memorized, right? So for you, you would have to play that compositional improvisation over and over and over until finally it really gets into your fingertips. But if you did that and it felt very, very loose and very, very comfortable, I bet it's going to start to sound much more like an improvisation. Now, the third part of that is, and the last part is that since you composed it and since you you used a lot of these themes and variation and that kind of stuff, now it's going to seem more like a composition because it's much more organized, right? Whereas sometimes an improvisation might go off and then it like comes back, it creates some tension, comes back, but by composing it, you kind of took away, you rounded out some of those rough edges, right? Because now you made it into a composition. You again fixed all those mistakes that you would make in real time in a way add to that improvisational element. Does that make sense?
Excellent points. Excellent points. Thank you very much.
You got it.
Very
John.
good analysis.
So the main thing is writing out improvisation. I wouldn't want to see anyone write out all their improvisations. No. You don't want to do that. But I also would not want to see anyone never write out an improvisation, right? I think it's a good idea to write out an improvisation now and again. And the other way of thinking about writing out your improvisation is also think about springboards, right? So a springboard is, let's say you have, like, this is your solo, all right? So, okay, this is the main solo right here, right? Now, this is where the solo starts. This is where the solo ends. So I'll put an E right there for end and an S right there for start, okay? So a springboard is meaning that you can kind of start with something right here, right? I'll call that a springboard, and I'll do this right over here, a springboard as well, right? So now you have a springboard there and a springboard here. You can think of a springboard as like literally like you know, diving into a pool, right? Those boards have a little bounce in them, and they're designed to do what? Get you where? Into your car or into the pool? Obviously into the pool, right? So that springboard is designed to get you right into your solo. This springboard here is designed to get you back to the song, right? So this springboard that you got going on here can be a lick, you know, it could be, you know, a set of chords, but the point is that these springboards are things that you can do every single time. This is just one possible way of doing this. Me personally, I don't use springboards. I just solo the entire thing. So this start to end right here, this would all be solo for me, right? I would solo throughout the entire thing. I don't do any springboard getting in or out. However, Some students kind of like the idea of like, okay, let me play a lick. So when I know I'm going to, play this tune, I know I'm going to always start with, okay, I'm going to do that little lick to start, my C blues solo, and then maybe leaving the solo, I'm going to do, something like that, right? So I know I'm going to start. Into the melody, right? So I have a little lick or a little idea that I start my solo with, and I have a little lick or a little idea that I end my solo with. The reason that you would use springboards is that you are guaranteed in the springboard to play something good that you like, that that you've done, several times, right? So you should practice each of those springboard licks over and over and over and over again until you finally get them down. These are ones that you would write out, right? This solo in here, there might be some clams, right? You might hit some bad notes here or there, right? But you start the solo and end the solo with something that is guaranteed to sound good. Why is that important? Because that's what people clue into. They remember the beginning, and mostly they remember the end, right? So if you're coming out of your solo, you're like, oh, what are people going to remember? They're going to remember that, oh man, he crashed and burned out of his solo, before he got back into the melody, right? So that's what they're going to remember. Whereas if you do something like this with like a springboard, then you're guaranteed that I'm going to play that, and I'm going to play it well. So even if I was like, right? So even though I messed up all that other stuff, I get that, I hit that, so now I can get back into the melody of the song, and people will forget and they will forgive the fact that during my solo here, I made mistakes all over the place. So again, this is just possible, some students like to do that, some players like to do that, some players don't. It's completely up to you. You also can make a decision. Maybe you have a springboard that gets you into your solo, and maybe you just use a springboard that gets you out of your solo. Maybe you do both, right? Again, completely up to you. Last thing I'll leave you with is a springboard getting into your solo is nice because, especially if you're kind of new to improvisation, it kind of allows you to establish that solo very well. This is probably not a great example, but this is the analogy I got for you right now. Think of your springboard, your initial springboard, that's your pickup line, right? So you see a cute guy or a cute girl over there that you want to talk to and, get to know better. Well, that's your pickup line, So, and there are some better springboards than other. Like, hey, like, how you doing? Like I heard angels fall from heaven. Oh, bleh, like terrible pickup line. But it might be, something else. You have some pickup line, some line that you say like, hey, did you know, that, I was in the Olympics, and like, oh, that's interesting. And that's a conversation starter, right? So that's another way in which you can look at these springboards is that it's a conversation starter so you can kind of get started on the right foot. All right, so enough about all of that. Other questions?
Hey, Willie, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I'm sort of in that transition phase because all my improvs have been composed up to now.
Yep.
So with the stand that I'm working on now, I decided that I'm going to take a part of that improv and play it on the fly, spontaneously. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing for me, like Michelle, I've kind of adapted my own kind of learning exercises for what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the chord tones.
Okay. Yep.
And really learning the chord tones. So what I'm doing is that I've decided I'm going to start with two notes, the root and the third of the chord. And what I'll do is I set the timer for 10 minutes, and I play it over I'm playing it over like a 12-bar progression of the song. And every 2 minutes or every minute I increase the speed I increase the tempo. But my limit is 2 notes for 2 days of practice. So the next day I'll add the 5th and then the 7th. So my goal is to get to the chord tones, but gradually. But what I'm finding is this, and this wasn't my intent, but as what's coming out of this is by giving myself 10 minutes, I have to think of, well, how do I vary this for 10 minutes, 2 notes? And it's amazing because all the things that you've talked about, like changing the rhythm, adding space in between the notes, articulations, dynamics, the range, going from one part of the keyboard to the other part of the keyboard. That's all working with 2 notes is forcing me to kind of all throw that in. And another benefit of starting with the 2 notes is I'm really in my ear getting that sound of going from the root to the 3rd and the 3rd to the root, both major and minor. So tomorrow's practice, I'm going to add the 5th, and then the next day, and what I'm doing by increasing the tempo, I'm allowing my brain to kind of like, all right, now I can do it. Now I can play the piece. And a third of the improv now is on the fly. Good. So it's making me feel good.
Yeah,
that I can actually play this. And what's interesting, the first part is all composed with some licks from my inspiration journal and whatever. Yeah. And so I'm focusing on enclosures. Do I have a triplet here? Here's a good place for approach notes and whatever. So it's really methodical. Yes, it's melodic too, because I like that form of composition to keep it somewhat close to the melody, to some degree.
That approach is perfect. That is a great approach, and obviously you see that I do that in the lessons, and that's really kind of my educational approach. Where it's like you have all this stuff, right? That you're working, that you can be working on, and you just take one thing, you take one item out. Like just focusing on the root and the 3rd. And what you're doing for yourself by doing that is now you're putting on your blinders and you can really focus all of your attention on that. But what you're also doing is you're allowing the possibility of new ideas and new experiences to kind of evolve naturally. Because when you're going through and you're trying to improvise and you're like, oh, I got all these notes and all these scales and all these chord tones and all this stuff, what is it? It's like we constantly feel like we're behind the 8 ball, like trying to, what's the chord tone? What is it? Right? It's always like like you're late to the party, right? And you're trying to figure out what the next note is that you should be playing. By taking all of that away and only having those 2 notes, now you get to focus on things like you said, like space. Or varying it, dynamics, articulation, that kind of stuff. And then you get to see how those small changes start to affect your improvisation, right? And then if you can create an improvisation that sounds halfway decent, even 1/10 decent to your ears, using just the root and the 3rd, well, what do you think is going to happen when you have more, ingredients, right? Now, one thing I would suggest is, you start with the root and the 3rd, right? And then you can add in the 5th and then, like, say, the 7th. Now, what you could do is you could go root 3 and then go to the 7th next, right? Okay. Because since the 5th is not, not a lot of bang for your buck. And then you could add in the 5th. But then you can also add in that 9th as well, So if I'm improvising like right, so you can hear, like, there was only one note I did, that one right there, when I just did at the end. All the other ones were just the root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and the 9th, And you can hear, like, if I just do, Now, again, I'm not going to win any awards with that improvisation, but it sounds halfway decent, right? It's good enough that I could kind of get started there, then I could build upon it from there. But the chord tone improvisation is always going to work, and it's always going to sound good. And there are some players, in fact, I was talking to a buddy of mine, a bass player the other day, and that's how he improvises. He doesn't think about all those scales. He literally thinks about chord tones and then the neighbor tones to those chord tones. You know, so there is a wide, like, you know, a wealth of information just within the chord tones. And the beauty is chord tones are always going to sound good. Right?
Yeah.
They're always going to work with whatever chord you're on. So you have the benefit of knowing that, okay, there are no avoid notes here. There's nothing I have to worry about hitting that's not going to work. Those chord tones are always going to work.
And I think another benefit of the two that I was finding was with setting the constraints of just those 2 notes to start with, was when I was doing it, it was actually fun. I mean, because I wasn't really, you know, focused on all the other stuff, like you say. It was you're freer to just kind of express how you feel.
And it's also fun because you're not behind the 8 ball, right? Because you're not feeling that like you're like the wheels turning in your brain trying to figure out what's next. You actually had a moment to okay, I can kind of think for a second. And that likely made it a lot more fun for you because you didn't feel so much pressure to have to come up with all of this, you know, harmonic data on the spot.
Exactly. In addition to that, you all of a sudden it's not sounding so bad.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing how much you can do with 2 notes.
Yeah, it really is.
So it's for me, it's a good way to go, and I'm going to keep pursuing that.
Excellent. And then again, remember this, everybody's different. You use the lessons the way that you want, but remember too, you might go down that road and you're doing that, right? And you're like, okay, yeah, this is working. But then maybe it gets to a point where, okay, that's not working anymore, right? And it's not you or the approach, it's just, okay, now you're going to do something different, right? So always be, you know, cognizant of that. And like the thing that I like to say, the most important thing that you really need to be successful at piano lessons or really anything that you want to learn, okay, really anything, is the motivation, right? As long like you see how right now you feel good about it. You feel like, oh, this is good, this is fun. It's like I got a plan, like all that. Like you know, you feel good. So your motivation level is high. You're going to get the most gains when your motivation level is high like that. So the most important thing that we all need to recognize is when this starts to happen. When you start to have that dip in motivation, or you know, that dip in motivation could also be a rise in frustration as well. But when you notice that, that's what you have to like really pay attention to and notice. And then when you notice it, then you need to make some kind of a change, right? So it's great that you're doing that. Keep going on with it. But at some point, if you get bored, you're like, this is like, you know, or it's getting frustrated, especially as you add on more notes, you might get that like, the feeling of frustration, or, you know, it doesn't feel as good anymore. Well, then at that point, reassess and figure out what is going to make sense for you. Maybe you pull back and maybe you're like, all right, forget the 5th. Maybe I'm just going to do the root 3rd and the 7th, and I'm going to sit there for a while, right? So that's the real big one, the motivation. You know, pay attention to the motivation and what feels good. And if you're paying attention to that, then everything else will start to fall in line.
Oh, by the way, on your springboard concept, I'm not sure, but I think it was Charlie Parker that said, talk about improvisation. He says, if you start well and end well, the middle will take care of itself.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Okay, it is absolutely true. You know, and then, you know, to beat a dead horse this time around, the whole pickup line. You know, imagine you're going to go out on a date, right? What's going to be remembered the most is the beginning and the end, right? So, I mean, think about it. Like, you could have the most wonderful date with somebody, and then you say something just ridiculous, right? You say something that's just like, oh, man. And then you end the date there. Well, forget it. It's done. But you could start it off fine, say something ridiculous, kind of recover, and then you guys are laughing and joking before the end. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, you were able to pull it out from the ashes there. But it truly is the beginning and the end, and really mostly the end. Like if there's a weight, the beginning is like that. The end is like that. Like if you end on a good note, then that, pun intended, if you end on a good note, that really it's huge. Whereas if you end on a bad note, forget it. It's just like everything just crashes and burns after that. So anyway, all right. So anyone else have anything else? And I see I got a bunch of you on Facebook, YouTube listening in. If you have questions, go ahead and just chat them in, either on YouTube or Facebook. We go while we have questions. Does anyone else have a question? No? And I can do this fancy thing. All right, so.
Hey, Willie, I have one more comment.
Go ahead, Bruce.
This has nothing to do with improv. I did something stupid a couple weeks ago. I sat down and I was in a hurry, so I started playing without warming up. And I immediately strained either a ligament here.
Yep.
So what I did, and if anyone has, I got this idea from a guitar player, and he on Amazon you can buy these like therapeutic mittens.
Oh yeah, is it like a compression glove?
Not really. It has you stick them in the microwave.
Oh, okay. Yep.
For 60 seconds, and you put them on for about 10 minutes. It warms up not only your fingers, but also your wrist, because they come down to here.
Yep.
And that's it. That really helps.
Yeah. And now let me jump in and say that is before practice, right? So you're warming it up and you're putting it on before you practice, like you put it on for 5-10 minutes or whatever, and that helps to warm up your hand, right? You want to be careful if you hurt yourself, right? Wherever you hurt yourself, and especially if it's a swollen, right, kind of issue, like you hurt yourself and the body is swollen, you do not want to put heat on it, right? So heat is the last thing that you want to put on any type of swelling.
The injury was about 4 or 5 days old, so I figured any swelling probably.
Yeah. Usually after 48 hours, the acute period is over. In the first 48 hours, ice. And then after that, then you could go, usually they say go back and forth between ice and heat. And what's interesting about that, I've, had several conversations with physical therapists about this and massage therapists over the years. And there's, what's interesting, there's a lot of debate on that too, about like, do I ice, do I heat? What's interesting though is the alternating between the ice and the heat allows blood to flow, and I think one of those reasons is that you're changing the thermal dynamics there, and it's getting things moving, right? So it goes cold to hot, and it gets, things moving. But you definitely want to make sure that if you hurt yourself and it's swollen, definitely utilize ice. But I love the idea of putting on that glove, that nice warm glove, before you practice for a few minutes. That's a great way of just loosening up.
Especially if it's cold in your
And then,
living in South Carolina, I don't have that problem. But,
after you do that, it's also a good idea to do some of those, wide range of motion, do some of that stuff, real gentle, just to kind of help loosen up. One good one is like, I can't do it here because I'm going to like smack a light, but if you can do those arm things, and the other one that's really, really great, especially as we get older, is this one. I can't really do it that well, but you put your hand down and then you just allow your arm to rest. Now, obviously, I would want more space here because I'm going to smack my hand on the keyboard. But you do that, and it's that pitcher's warm up, and then you go the opposite way. It really just helps to like loosen up that whole rotator cuff and everything.
I live in a retirement community, and with all kinds of activities. Yeah. And one of the number one injuries is rotator cuffs when people get older, because they never do any type of stretching or strengthening of that area. So they go out and play softball or tennis.
They do that.
All of a sudden,
shit, they do that, right? And then this whole thing right here, oh yeah. The other thing to recognize too is like when we're at our computer, right? We're at the computer, we're like doing this, shoulders in. We're at the piano, what is it? Shoulders in. Like it's that kind of stuff. So we gotta like really start to open that up. And it's really a matter of like this is a great stretch. I love this one. Oh man, that feels good. You know, where you just like kind of clasp your hands behind and then just pull it back nice and easy. But like these kinds of stretches, you know, some people hate stretching. And you know, and I'll make it real simple for you. Don't stretch then. You'll hurt yourself, right? But if you want to avoid hurting yourself, doing some of those stretches, even whether you like them or not, unfortunately, it's just one of those physical things where the human body, it helps. It most definitely helps. You got to remember, we're not designed to play this. And we're not designed to play this for long periods of time. That's not how the human body was designed, like this fine motor skill. And that's why you have so many people that get repetitive use injuries at an instrument, right? How many times do you find guitar players and whatnot, they have to wear braces, you know, because they overuse their hand, and now they have carpal tunnel, right? It's I used to see that all the time when I was at Berkeley. So we, you know, it doesn't mean that we can't play the instrument and play it for as long as we live. It just means we have to be smart about, you know, the body mechanics of it and make sure that we're not doing something that's going to hurt ourselves. So, Rick asks, how is the grand piano project going? Will we see it in a standards by the dozen lesson soon? Yes. So the band was here last night, and we are. We have some cool stuff I got to keep a little bit under wraps because this is streaming just anywhere online. And before, you know, I have some other people that are like, oh, I like that idea. Let me do that. We're going to do some cool stuff with the trio and streaming. So one of the big things is I had to wait for my grand piano to get mitified, which it is now mitified. So my process is I'm going to create an article. I'm going to talk to you guys about how the mitification went and what I'm using for that and how that works. And show you some pictures of the install of all that as well. It's kind of neat. So anyway, yes, it's still going. I won't be doing any of the standards by the dozen lessons using the grand piano. It'll still be here because of the miking and all of that. I want everything to be consistent. The grand piano is going to be utilized more for, like, you could think more like a master class kind of situation. But it is definitely in the books, and it is definitely moving forward. Thanks for asking, Rick. All right, so let's see. Anyone else have any questions? Well, going once. Maybe a course next year about interacting with the combo using our standards. That's a good idea. It's kind of where we're going to be going. I think you'll like the idea that I've come up with for that. So, but yes, that's definitely a great idea. Like I said, I'm going to keep it under wraps for right now. But yes, there is definitely we are definitely moving in that direction. That there's more interaction with the band, and what does that look like, and how do you do that? So yes. Any other questions? Oh, all right. Good way to store music for a gig, from River Sunstone. All right, so I will tell you what I use. I don't have it right in front of me here, but you know what? I could probably... okay, yeah. I use this app, okay, which I like. I have the PDF versions of the real books. I've purchased all of the real books, and I also have the PDF version of them. So user must provide their own PDF content. I will tell you that there are places online that if you type in real book, PDF, download, you will find them. But I'm not going to show you how to do that because you need to make sure that you purchase the actual real book first, right? So you need to have the physical real book purchased and then go ahead online and download the PDF if you want. But once you have that PDF file, then you can load it right up in this iGig book, and I think it's like, I don't know, something like $10 for this app. But what's neat is that then it gives an interface kind of similar to iReal Pro in that you have a list of your songs, you click on the song, and it takes you to that page in the PDF file that is not just chords, but it's the chords and the melody, right? So you have the chords and the melody of the song. Whereas something like iReal Pro is just the chords. They don't have any melody in there. Now, I will tell you that when you download the PDF file, depending on where you get the PDF file, sometimes the page offset is wrong, meaning that you put in like, okay, look, you go to iGig book and you say, I want How High the Moon. You click on How High the Moon and it takes you to, How Insensitive, right? So that's like a song or two after How High the Moon, right? So there is a way in iGig book that you can change the offset, but sometimes you just have to deal with some funkiness like that, and you got to go back a couple of pages. But I do find that it's a nice program. It works relatively well. I'm sure that there's a competitor program as well. So, but at least if you go there to iGig book, you go down in the App Store, you could see other related apps. You might find something else, or if you type into Google iGig book competitor, you might find another app. But what's neat is you could put together playlists too. So then imagine you could have your playlist for a gig, and it's bam, 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 click on each of the tunes, and then it loads up the sheet music right there for you in the PDF file, right? Now, there are other ways in which you could just take the PDF file into something like Goodreader or any other PDF reader on the iPad, but then you're doing a lot of that scrolling and trying to find the right page. So basically what iGig book does for you is it has a database of all of the songs, and it says, go to that page in the PDF file, right? That's the main benefit that iGig book does for you. But you could easily just store your PDF files in, say, iCloud, and then click on it, and then load it up, and then just scroll through the book to get to the song that you want. Obviously, on a gig, that's a slow process. So,
Apologies.
So forget you, Siri. So anyway, that's what I would suggest taking a look at is the iGig book. Let's see. Oh yeah, paperless app for music can add PDFs markup. It's outstanding. Okay, yep. Paperless music app for iPad. Excellent. So, yep, thank you, Rick. There is a competitor. I think I remember you mentioning that before. Like anything else, like these things, like once you get into one, you're just kind of like, okay, that works well enough, so that's what you end up using. So, anyone have anything else? All righty. Well, I am going to let you guys go. All right. Thank you all very much for joining me. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock will be our Jazz Edge chord training for my Jazz Edge students. So be sure to log in and join me tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. Besides that, I will see you guys very, very soon. And for those of you who join me on YouTube or Facebook, be sure to join next Wednesday for our next Ask Willie Live. All right, guys, take care. Have a good one.